Pleased to welcome Chris Wright, the CEO from Liberty Energy, with us fresh off the stage at the North Dakota Petroleum Council. Chris, thanks for joining us.
Thrilled to be here.
What do you think about this conference?
I love it. I love it. We got people from all over the state, all over the industry, and it's a dynamic, energetic crowd. You can just feel the buzz here. Just honored to be here.
What do you think the wave that comes from this, that buzz, is going to lead to? Where does it take us?
I think it keeps reinvigorating the Bakken, and I think it gives appreciation for people here in eastern North Dakota and people across the country that hear about our industry, and they come here and see and engage with the people that make our industry tick. And I think that's a bunch of great humans, passionate about what they do and committed to keep doing it.
Tell us about Liberty and your story here in the Bakken.
Yeah, so Liberty Energy, our frac company, started in the Bakken a little more than 12 years ago. And we started a company called Liberty Resources a couple of years before that. That's an oil and gas producer in the Bakken. But Liberty Energy has spread to all the major shale basins, but started right here in the Bakken in North Dakota, where the shale revolution began in natural gas north of Fort Worth suburbs in Texas. But the shale revolution transitioned from gas to oil right here in western North Dakota. The Bakken, the development of the Bakken, changed global oil markets.
5 billion barrels has been celebrated at this conference of Bakken barrels, but the resource has hundreds of billions of barrels. So what's next?
Continued development. We're 1.2 million barrels a day today. I think it stays that way for quite some time. And as we're producing, we're incrementally improving the technology for frac and primary production. But in parallel, there's work on the next wave, secondary production, which is probably going to be some kind of injecting ethane or CO2 or something into the reservoirs to help recover more and more of that oil that's in place. But humans are ingenious. Is more of that oil going to come out? Of course. Is the Bakken going to be a major oil field 30 years from now? Absolutely.
Your talk today was about energy, climate, poverty, and prosperity. Connect those dots.
Yeah, look, humans were poor with low life expectancies until the arrival of hydrocarbons. The last 200 years has more than doubled human life expectancy. We had 90% of humans living on less than $2 a day in today's dollars. 90%. Today that number's 9% and falling. That is energy. Energy just changed the human condition, and it's going to keep moving forward. But we still have a lot of people that don't have the fully energized lives you and I have. We need growing energy resources to lift the other 7 billion people up in the world. And climate change is a real but slow-moving, actually relatively modest phenomenon, but it's being exaggerated and used as a reason to grow top-down control, both against human liberty. We're going to tell people what they can do and where they can live and how they can operate. This is stifling of innovation. It's impoverishing, and it's getting in the way of growing that energy production to make everyone in the world live a better life. So my passion is for people to become, as I say, energy sober, which means understanding the energy system, its centrality to the human condition across the whole planet, and to understand climate change in its proper perspective. It's a slow-moving phenomenon, dominantly contributed by burning hydrocarbons, but even the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, even their own economists that study this problem predict it might reduce per capita income 2 or 3% a century from now when everyone's 5 times richer. So the sort of the own math of the people in the movement of this is slow. We should watch this, we should learn maybe some technology innovation. This is a slow moving, not one of the top 10 problems on the planet, but yet politicians and activists and the media are using it to claim there's a crisis today. Because in a crisis, we don't have to have thoughtful actions. We can just use a sledgehammer to change things and do things. And that's very destructive, very destructive.
How do you combat it?
Well, if I knew that answer, we wouldn't be in this crisis. For 20 years, I've been speaking on climate change and engaging, and as I talk today, just putting the basic data out there on energy and climate change. I spoke at University of Colorado Boulder, some very liberal kind of university swept up in this phenomenon. Extinction Rebellion held a funeral for Mother Earth on my arrival, and maybe a little bit of a hostile crowd. At the end, I have a line of students looking for internships. People are very movable on this topic. They just haven't been given a sober presentation about the data on energy and its impact on lives and the technologies of how it's produced, and a sober understanding about climate change. All that data is out there a few clicks away, but people don't do that. It's more sound bites. So kids have sort of been preached climate as a catastrophe and we must change everything now. 20% of children report nightmares about climate change. Yet, as I showed today, your risk of dying from extreme weather today is 99% lower than it was 100 years ago. So just the reality of climate change and what you hear in the news and media and politicians about climate change they're almost unrelated. And so what I want to do is encourage kids to be critical thinkers, engage into that data and look at those trade-offs. And the reaction to it's tremendous. College kids that maybe are hostile on arrival, they get it. They've just never seen the data and presented. I've engaged with a number of politicians that are sort of centrist, that are, opposing pipelines and infrastructure. Engage them in some dialogue and some data. They change their opinions. We just need to step up and engage honestly. But if I could say one more thing, I would say our industry is a huge part of the problem. We contribute to the growth of climate alarmism. Our industry, when they're highlighting the great things they did in the year, they'll lead with their very modest reductions in Scope 1 greenhouse gas emissions that aren't going to move the needle globally at all. But yet they highlight that as like the thing they're most proud of. That if even the oil and gas companies think climate change is the number one issue, it must be. It's not. No sober analysis puts it anywhere close to the number one issue. But if our industry keeps reinforcing that it must be the number one issue, that's why the world and kids and politicians are drunk on this stuff. We need to stand up and be honest.
But the markets, obviously, the access to capital very often goes through that path of a greener footprint, doesn't it? So how do you maneuver knowing that ESG is commanding these global markets, the banks are wanting it, the capital markets are wanting it? I mean, you have a lot of forces against you demanding those little tidbits of incremental success, don't we?
We do. And my answer to that has been to speak honestly about it. The book that they're distributing today, that's subject of my talk, Bettering Human Lives at libertyenergy.com, that book walks through that data. There's no pledge of net zero, no touting of our greenhouse gas emissions. In fact, the first data point I highlight about our company is over 100 million humans get clean cooking fuel out of wells fracked by Liberty. And I have found the activist investors, they read that book and they aren't beating the drum for Liberty to make a net zero pledge now. They're like, oh, we get it. Actually, you've got better metrics. You want a better lives, and you talk about that. People thought I was risky to go out on a limb and write and speak honestly about climate change. It's not risky at all. So we need to push back against that and say, hey, we do want to make the world a better place. We do want people to have better jobs. We do want a cleaner environment and cleaner water. And of course we want those things. But the pathway being advocated today is not the pathway to get there. And my hope is more and more people in our industry and around the world just dig a little bit into the data and be honest about it. It's not a bogeyman.
Why do you think the industry is sort of succumbing to it and leading with, as you say, this incremental change that isn't?
In the short run, it's easy. Everybody's hopped up about climate change and so, well, we're going to say yes, that we're going to address climate change. I think it's a total mistake. People say to me, our investors want us to report on our emissions. Okay, do that on page 62 of your report. Don't put it on page 1 or page 2 or page 3, because it's not nearly as important as the other things. Clean air, reducing particulate emissions or SOx or NOx, those are immediate human health issues, far more important than greenhouse gas emissions reductions. I think our industry just has to have the courage to be honest. It's the right way to go, and believe me, I've been doing it. We've been a public company for 6.5 years. I think it's been appreciated by our investors and by the community around us. We haven't suffered any damage by just being honest.
And what we do in the oil and gas industry here is certainly, quote unquote, cleaner than anything done anywhere else in the world, right? So if you're truly an environmentalist that cares most for Mother Earth, you would want most of the oil and gas production to happen here where there are best practices, wouldn't we?
Oh, 100%. I wrote an editorial a couple years ago about the ban of drilling on federal land. I said two things are sure to come from that. One is larger greenhouse gas emissions, because that doesn't reduce demand for oil and gas, just means it's not produced here in the United States and we import it from somewhere else with much higher emissions. So to your point, 100%. Displacing emissions, that doesn't reduce emissions, that just displaces them. And ultimately, if you produce less here, there's a little bit less oil and gas in the market, it means higher prices. Most of the policies justified in the name of climate policies, they aren't climate policies. I was in DC 6 months ago, and my message to Democrats and people driving it is all these things to make it harder to produce oil and gas in the United States. What's the impact? It doesn't change the demand. It means a little bit less supply, a little bit higher prices. I said, thank you. My company's record profitability. Our customers are at record profitability. We're only 1% of America. 99% of Americans are paying higher oil and gas prices, and that incremental production we're not producing is now produced in dirtier places, and those jobs and that economic opportunity somewhere overseas. That's not a climate policy. That's a political posture of a climate policy that really just ultimately makes the air a little bit dirtier and everyone a little bit poorer. Who's for dirtier air and poorer people? Certainly not me.
Yeah, it's invigorating to hear your thesis here. I mean, it works. Where do you most see, especially with younger people, those light bulbs going off where they recognize that, hey, maybe I've been blindly sort of following a path that doesn't make any sense?
Oh, like I did today, if I go into classrooms, I've done it in junior highs, high schools, and colleges, kids are amazed because I'm showing the actual data. I'm not preaching another thing, saying, I'm just showing them, here's what we know about climate change, here's what we know about energy, here's the data. The room is silent, people are staring at the data. At the end, a lot of the kids are a little bit angry. They feel like they've been lied to. They'd always been told that more people are dying and the storms are getting worse and climate change is the biggest issue and how to make the world a better place is to reduce energy consumption a little bit. The data clearly shows the opposite, So they're a little bit angry, they feel like they've been lied to, but they're also energized. Oh my gosh, kids are idealistic. They want to make the world a better place. They want to be part of something bigger than themselves. And what the truth shows is there is a great noble cause, which is to help spread energy access to the 7 billion people that don't have lifestyles like you and I. And even in our own country, 10% of Americans don't heat their homes to a safe temperature because they can't afford it. Kids have no idea about that. Boy, you pass policies that are going to make home heating or electricity more expensive, you're actually increasing the death rate of low-income, elderly, poor health Americans. They don't want any part of that, but they just didn't connect those dots. But they pick up on it right away. I'm not shouted down. People are like, wow, thank you. I'm going to get some data in. They change. Look, we give everyone the benefit of the doubt. People that are hopped up on climate change, there's nothing wrong with them. They've just not been exposed to the sober understanding. And that's because we've been too shy. There's one group shouting from the rooftops, and if that's all you ever heard, of course you'd believe that's true. We need to stand up and speak out a little bit more. The audience is incredibly receptive to it.
Which of the data points do you think most awakens them?
Two things I would say. One is that deaths from extreme weather have plummeted and continue to plummet. They think, oh my gosh, I thought storms were getting worse and more people were dying. So that kind of taking away from climate as an emergency, they're shocked by that, but they see the numbers. And the other is people don't realize that 2.2 billion people still cook their daily meals burning wood and dung inside their huts. And the pollution from that, indoor air pollution, kills 3 million people a year. We can save 3 million lives by just simply getting cook stoves and propane into the homes of 2.2 billion people. We started a foundation, the Bettering Human Lives Foundation, not to hand out free propane, charity doesn't work, but to lend money to businesses to help spread access, to get people to graduate from wood or charcoal to propane. It is game-changing, it is life-changing. Kids are shocked to hear that. Do you want to suppress hydrocarbons and have these people still burning wood and dung and living in smoke-filled huts and women and children spending hours gathering wood and sitting over a smoky fire to cook food? Or do you want them to have a clean-burning propane stove that doesn't have soot inside the air and you could turn it on and turn it off? You don't have to spend hours tending a fire. Man, kids are 100% on propane stoves and 0% on that, but they just don't know that. They've never heard that.
Yeah, and part of this is our education system, isn't it? I mean, they're indoctrinated.
They are indoctrinating. It's sad to say, but it is true. In second grade and third grade, this indoctrination that fossil fuels are bad and that climate change is a catastrophe, is a crisis, they're just factually false, but yet they're said repeatedly. When I speak in schools, the teachers are there too. They're shocked by this stuff as well. And I think it gives them, they've been trained to do this, they've been doing it for years, so they don't jump up and say, I'm wrong, but they know in their hearts they're wrong. And I know they're forced to tone it down. They may not talk about it as much anymore. They've seen the light bulb on in the kids with the data. But yes, this problem starts in elementary schools. By the time kids get to college, they know this is true. But again, in an hour, their opinions can be changed if we're sober and honest and thoughtful about it.
The environmental extremists and their minions, for lack of a better term, the sort of mouthpieces of it, are a powerful force. Do you think we can turn this tide? Is this winnable?
Well, for sure it's winnable, because the goal that people want, the world is never going to run on windmills and solar panels and batteries. It's just physically not possible. 2% of global energy comes from wind and solar after $4 to $5 trillion of subsidies. And they're only the electricity sector. You can't build wind turbines or solar panels without copious amounts of hydrocarbons, both for the high temperature process heat needed to make those materials, and also for the molecules themselves to make plastics and resins. Wind turbines are made out of oil and gas. So the world's is never going to be the way the environmentalists want it to be. That's just not going to happen. My view is, if we go this way for 15 or 20 more years, we'll have tens of millions of needless deaths and just a poorer, less opportunity-rich society. But if instead of 15 to 20 years, we can reduce it in 3 to 5 years, we'll have a better, wealthier, more opportunity-rich world and less scared kids. So for sure we will win, because the physics and math are on our side. But the sooner we can swing this pendulum back, the better. And you're right, the large NGOs, this is their business. They raise big money on it. Most of them are not in that persuadable sector. There's 15% of people, this is their definition of who they are in the world. We're not going to change them, but we need to change the receptivity to their message from the rest of Americans and the rest of students around the world. Also, these NGOs and all that, this is a rich person phenomenon in rich countries. You go to the developing world, climate change isn't even on their radar. They're not worried about that. They want better lives and better, healthier families and more food and better shelter and more job opportunities for their kid. They think this climate alarmism is as much nonsense as you and I do. The vast majority of the world believes what you and I believe. But it's just a large percent of people in the wealthy countries who are well off and politically powerful. It's a minority that's driving this mania. But in the end, of course, it will fade.
What else do you want us to know?
Boy, that's a lot. That is great. Look, my company's called Liberty Energy for a reason. I named it after the two things that I think created the modern world: the rise of human liberty, freedom, bottom-up social organization, not top-down control, and the explosion in available energy that came from hydrocarbons. Those two things changed global life expectancy from 30 years to 73 years. And there's so many people craving more energy in their lives. So what we do here in the state of North Dakota in the United States, as now the largest oil producer, largest natural gas producer, largest natural gas liquid producer, we're bettering the world. We should be proud of what we do. We should stand up and say we're proud of it and not cower down and try to appease climate alarmists. We need to stand up, but we got a lot to be proud of. This country, this institution of freedom, and this energy that powers our world. We're lucky.
Team prosperity versus poverty.
Exactly. You ask kids, which team do you want to be on? If you ask the question that way, Team Prosperity wins every time.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you. Love what